So I'm here today with Lih-Tah Wong. He's the former president of the Michigan Pen Collectors Club here in Michigan. How you doing today, Lih-Tah?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you for asking, and thank you for inviting me to be here taking part in virtual Detroit Pen Show.
Well, we're happy to have you, Lih-Tah. Hey, I know there's a lot of people here that already know where you're from, but why don't you go ahead and tell us anyways?
Well, I am in southeastern Michigan, the Detroit suburbs of city of Sterling Heights, although our pen shows have been on the slightly west side of where I am.
Hmm.
I know that you had arranged until it was postponed until next year to be at the Hilton Garden in Southfield, Michigan.
Right.
So hopefully next year these pen shows can start resuming physical in-person events as we normally had it prior to this pandemic.
Yeah, we'll see how that all plays out. Hopefully that does where the states start to open things up so that we can do that. Lih-Tah, you've got some pretty good background in the Parker brand of pens, specifically the 75s. You've got an overview for us, from what I understand. You're going to talk to us a little bit about collectability, the materials, patterns, and stuff like that, correct?
Yes, I do have that.
All right, well, why don't you go ahead and show that to us a little bit. Now, before, just so that everybody knows, I forgot to go over this, but for those of you who don't know how to use the icons on the top side of your video, you've got a grid view, you've got an active speaker view, as well as a video view. So either one of the other two, like the active speaker views, what that's going to do is that'll give you a larger screen for the person that's talking so that you don't see all these little thumbnails like you see in the grid view. So I'm going to go ahead and let Lih-Tah continue. I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead, Lih-Tah.
Okay, well, I was just going to add that if you'd go on the top menu for view, if you're on a Windows PC, you should see a whole host of checkboxes down at the bottom. You can actually hide the non-video participants, meaning that they'd only see you, Dale, and myself, since
Okay.
most other participants have their video disabled. At any rate, my introduction, let me share my my screen here for my presentation. Okay. Can everybody see that okay? I hope so. In any event.
Yeah, I could see it.
Okay, terrific.
That's good.
My introduction to the Parker 75 actually happened a very long time ago. I was actually still a college student back in 1978. Sorry, a couple of years before, 1974. And I actually happened to find one in an empty lecture hall. That was my introduction to the 75s. It was this classic sterling silver in the grid pattern that I found in this empty lecture hall underneath someone's seat. And it had been empty for hours, so I have no idea how to trace back its owner.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward about 20 some years later, and I happened to rediscover that pen. It's funny that I never used that pen while I was in college. I had used rapidographs. I don't know if you guys know, it's more like a drafting pen.
Okay.
During my school courses, and it wasn't until 1996 or something like that that I had actually found that old Parker 75.
Huh.
And my introduction to the pen world was the curiosity in basically resuscitating that pen and starting to use it. So it turns out that the motivation, very few people know this, the motivation why I started my website was because I felt like in the process of trying to find another pen like it, another 75, but in a different material or color and so forth, I actually bought a vermeil, which is gold fill or gold plate over sterling silver, Parker 75. And I eventually found out by discovering eBay that I had actually been taken to the tune of a couple $100 more than what it was actually worth. And that's primarily because there was such a dearth of information on this pen. So I started accumulating, thanks to the generosity of a lot of other people who were willing to share their insights into this particular pen, that I started to collect this information. And I view myself as a curator more than anything else, rather than a collector. So on that note, let me proceed with this show. So one of the reasons why Parker 75 is has quite a following today, and it's funny because when I got into it, it wasn't considered a vintage pen. It's still relatively modern at that time. Mm-hmm. But this model was actually introduced. The design came out in 1963, which happens to be the 75th year of Parker Pen Company's existence. And production didn't start until towards the late in 63 and early 64, such that they could actually commercially launch it in 64. And the first 75 is the classic one. It was made out of sterling silver, and it had a crosshatch grid pattern that's quite recognizable today. And in fact, many other pen companies have mimicked this combination of material and pattern subsequent to the successful marketing of the Parker 75. So it does have a very, very rich history spanning about 30 some years, because it lasted, production I suspect lasted till about 1992. So from 64, when it commercially launched, to 1992, that's almost 30 years. And they made millions, I would expect, in various materials as well as patterns. So I find it a very collectible pen. And one of the reasons why I concentrated on this was actually to exercise some fiscal responsibility. I just couldn't afford, starting out in my new work and so forth with a family and such, to be able to go spend money on every single pen that I found attractive. But the collectability of the 75 to me happens to be based upon various attributes. They have many different materials, many different patterns and trim details. There were a couple of limited editions, some high-end names in the jewelry trade had private label models. And there are so many prototypes, as well as historically significant models. And we'll get to each one of these very quickly. So, starting with the materials. Most people are very familiar with the ones made out of sterling silver. As I said earlier, there's also vermeil models, which are either gold-filled or gold-plated over the sterling silver. There are solid gold models made out of 14K as well as 18K. And I'm not talking about just the nib. I'm talking about the actual cap and the barrel. And in some instances that I have seen, even the chassis, the decorative clip screw at the top of the cap, as well as at the bottom of the barrel, some of them may have been made in solid gold as well. And the reason why I say that is because on some certain models, if you actually took it off and looked at it, there would be some hallmark inscription that would indicate the gold content. There are also models whose cap and barrel are made out of stainless steel, aka Flighter, and also titanium. That's a little unusual because the titanium model came about really, from what I can see, as a way for Parker to reuse the less than successful T1 model, where they actually fitted a 75 rib, made it into a T1 barrel, as well as a T1 cap that had to be slightly adjusted in order to accommodate the pen, the innards, so that the cap would close properly without leaving a gap. And then there are many different brass models that have been either coated with lacquer or plated in gold or silver. So those are the types of materials that are available. For me, I have a variety of these in my personal collection. Obviously, not so many in solid gold, but I do also collect those that are made out of the strategic metals, stainless steel and titanium, and then of course the precious metals, sterling silver and gold. Some of the ones made of brass, what I put in my collection are those that are especially hard to find, namely the early lacquer models that have the Chinese inscription on the back of the cap. For patterns, there are a lot of different patterns. These are just the production models that I'm showing. There are those that are smooth and finish, like the Flighter, the stainless steel Flighter, as well as a sterling silver model that's known as the Keepsake, which is shown at the top of the screen. And there are those that have a grid pattern, and it's not just the crosshatch grid, but there are also grids that are slightly different, like the ones that's shown here. There are two versions of this. One is known as the Prince de Galles, the other one is known as the Écossais. There are models with just lines, dense line pattern, as well as not so dense pattern. And there are those with chevrons, and of course the lacquer, which is smooth and different colors. The bottom pen that you see is known as the Rainbow, although the official name for that model is called the Regency. This is a very rare model today. I would guess probably on the order of a couple hundred were made. This pattern is very fragile, so a lot of people who have it actually they don't use the pen. In fact, when I first got my Rainbow 75, I was chastised by some other people for actually having it in my pocket. They said to me, "Don't you know how fragile that is? Just the oils from your fingers can cause the pattern to delaminate and ruining it." Yeah, I have to admit that my Rainbow 75 sits merely as a display queen today. Now, there are a lot of variations in the trim details too. In the grips, I show a couple here. You might find it difficult to see, but some have inscriptions on the metal band with a zero reference, because the nib can be rotated. So the zero reference is helpful in determining the angle of rotation that suits your writing style. Others later on, they did away with the zero, but they still have these ruled lines that are inscribed. And then it switched again. They have models of the gripping sections that don't have any. It's just solid gold color, as well as a thin band, which is indicative of a French-made gripping section. Then the end pieces are very different too. The early ones have this flat appearance that shows in the chassis on the left-hand side. Later models had this circular dimple, and Parker even made available these letter stencils, allowing you to personalize the pen. And then later on, they had models that they actually put a cabochon, a rounded plastic jewel. There's an Australian version where they actually put a cabochon that's opal, which is very pretty because of the fancy colors. There are other chassis that would indicate that it was originally used for a roller ball instead of a fountain pen or a felt tip. And there are also nib material variances too, marked either 14K, that's US made, or 14K point US made. They're 14K French, and they're 18K French. There's a mixed material called octanium, which is an alloy of 8 different metals. And then the rarer titanium one, one interesting story about the octanium is that it was actually made in 75s, sold to be a less expensive version of one that had a gold nib. And there's a titanium nib as well, which is extremely hard to find. And most people don't know that they're actually 14K white gold nib that were made. I've only seen just 1 or 2 samples of that inscription. It's white and it actually say 14K point on it. So the limited editions, these are the official limited editions that Parker made with the Parker name. One that's very well known is the Spanish Treasure Fleet, which has a very interesting story. I actually had an email exchange with the son of the man who actually went to meet the source of all of these recovered Spanish galleon treasure and the silver that the cob coins that they had gathered. But those cob coins were in such bad shape that really wasn't very marketable as coins themselves. And Parker arranged this. I actually put that on my website, the story of this whole process. That was actually reflected in a book by the person on the other party, saying that they had just basically made a deal on a handshake and hoping that Parker won't screw the company because they needed to use the funds to go pay for more exploration and retrieval of the treasure. The bicentennial was issued to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the U.S. and so it came out in 1976. The Queen Elizabeth limited edition came out using material recovered from the sunken RMS Queen Elizabeth ship that burned and sunk in Hong Kong Harbor. They retrieved the brass fittings from that and used the brass to make this limited edition pen. Some of the high-end private model names that come to mind include Tiffany and Saks Fifth Avenue, as well as Cartier. There are models that are both in sterling silver as well as solid 14K gold. Boucheron is another famous name from the jewelry trade, and they had some very unique pieces that came out, sold under their name. It's actually marked Boucheron. So there are quite a few of these. It's very hard to find these pens. Then getting to prototypes, hard to quantify how many prototypes there actually are. I've seen them covered with lizard skin. The one that's green is a good example of that. That particular pen was actually shown to me by Susan Worth many years ago. I had an opportunity to take a picture of it. There are other models also covered with different colored skins as well as, believe it or not, cloth. I don't show it here, but I actually have some samples that are actually covered with cloth. Now, just imagine how would you clean that?
Well, I was just going to ask, what kind, are we talking just cloth, just like cotton cloth? That's literally.
Yeah, with different patterns on them.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yes, very, very interesting. The one that's just below the green pen is actually a basket weave that I have this particular one, but the one that I got was actually from an ex-jeweler, a retired jeweler who used to work for Tiffany in New York, and this was basically I believe it was done by the same artist in France. And Parker tried to have Tiffany sell that as one of their high-end, expensive pen models of the 75. And then this one, I can definitely tell you that but the ends of the on the cap as well as the barrel, it is stamped with the gold content, 18K. There's a hallmark there.
Okay.
So here are some of the interesting prototypes, and there are many of them. I can't imagine trying to, make a collection just with that goal in mind in getting all of the Parker prototypes that exist. The historical significance of some of the pens are that the one that's the moon dust pen, that was actually has moon dust brought back by the astronauts, and some of that material was actually mixed into the metal that was that made the pen. And President Nixon, on his inaugural trip to open the relationship with China, brought 2 of these as gifts to give to government officials. From what I hear, they weren't the national government officials. They were the provincial government officials that got the 2 pens. The one on the right was used in the signing of the INF Treaty between Russia, USSR, and the United States by Reagan. So there are quite a few models like this that are historically significant. So to conclude this discussion, there are so many 75s, and the search is never ending. I haven't made it at my goal to try to get every single piece, but it's definitely collectible and very interesting because of the rich history of the pens. But it goes to show you that there are a lot of varied interests in this community, in our community, and if all of the participants here have a chance to go and meet people at pen shows, you can get an indication, just as I did, of how big the community gets, although it doesn't compare to other collectibles, but it's still quite a very big community, and the interests are varied. I would also strongly recommend that people attend any local show within driving distance, just to have the camaraderie of being with other like-minded folks, learn something, which I do often, learn new things. In the Michigan Pen Club in particular, we have occasions when some people talk about their areas of interest or repair, for example. It's definitely worthwhile to do. At any rate, so I would definitely encourage people to go and seek out pen clubs in the area. Just do a search on Google to find local pen clubs. And it's a little difficult this year. There's no question, with all the cancellation of shows where you have in-person contact with one another. But we have to try to live within this environment. Hopefully it'll improve. But I would definitely encourage all the participants that are here to go and seek out any local group of people with informal gatherings. I know their pen clubs are scattered all throughout the country. I mentioned earlier that I've attended the one at the London, Ontario regular meetings that they have on the weekends, although I haven't been there lately, and I would imagine that there may be some restrictions nowadays for doing that. So I don't know whether they've been holding their regular weekly meetings. But joining a pen club, or even finding someone to invite you so that you can actually go and check it out, is strongly encouraged too. For any of those who are in Michigan, feel free to contact me via the Michigan Pen Club website, which is shown in the chat window there as www.mishpens.com. If you use that website to reach out, that usually comes to me, since I'm the secretary treasurer of the club.
Well, Lih-Tah, I don't even have to ask you any questions. You're just taking right over. You've got everything right on my list here. So I know you're the former president. The current sitting president is Eric Fonville, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And as you know, we worked together before. I used to also organize the regular pen shows since the year 2000, until you were kind enough to take over and promote the Detroit Pen Show for our local area.
Sure.
And I noticed that there's a question there for me.
All right, go ahead. Would you like me to read it, or you want to read it?
I think most people can say, just to respond about the numbers, it is really hard to quantify, Tess, how many there are. I have a number of prototypes that I was fortunate enough to get, but I have been told, just in the non-production prototype pens, that at one time in their pen museum, if you can call it that, were represented by these big 4-drawer filing cabinets that Parker, in this museum, if you want to call it that, in the storage facility more likely, had every single one of those drawers held several hanging folders, dozens, I would imagine. And each hanging folder had probably a dozen or so pens in plastic, suspended in plastic in those hanging folders. And so just in the prototypes alone, I have to think that there are probably over 100 different prototypes there. I don't know where they ended up, because they closed it went from here in the United States to the UK, to New Haven, where they had a production facility. And then that facility had been closed several years ago. So I'm not sure who has all that stuff, let alone the production models. So it's really hard to answer that question, Tess, as far as how many different models that they are. From a production standpoint, if you also try to think about the variations, some might have gold-plated trim, others have silver-plated trims. So those combinations would also make the pens look slightly different from one another, although the material and the pattern might be the same. So if you include those variations, it makes it even more, the numbers are even more astounding as far as how many variants actually exist in production.
It looks like Heather's got a quick question for you about the possibility of starting a pen club. Do you have any suggestions on how you would go about doing that for somebody who wanted to start something locally in their area?
Well, I would definitely suggest that if you have found some people, whether you find them online, they happen to be in your local area, when the time comes that we can actually meet again in person, that it would probably start out as being an occasion where you can just get together for coffee or a meal. Doesn't have to be fancy. In fact, I remember the very first time I actually met Eric Fonville, who is currently our Michigan Pen Club president, was arranged by another member of the club that happened to have us meet at this restaurant. And Eric was very kind enough to bring a case full of his collection to show and tell, basically. And that was many, many years ago. But that was the first time I ever met him. And so if you find like-minded people online and they happen to be in your local area, I would encourage you to just reach out to them and say, hey, how about meet for coffee and bring some pens for show and tell. And I think as far as a meeting place, a local coffee shop will probably suffice. I know there's a group in Ann Arbor, so just do a search of pen clubs on Google, and you'll probably find a Wikipedia that shows where they are. And then on various social media platforms, on Facebook, there's actually a weekly pen event group that you can also, that's free to sign up and join the group for trading pens and so forth. So there are many social media platforms that you can find other people who may be in the same area as you that might just welcome an invitation to just meet for coffee and, have show and tell of pens.
Just out of curiosity, Lih-Tah, you mentioned in your collection, how many Parkers do you have in your collection, your 75?
Okay, so in my core collection, I have actually restricted it. So I actually have about 8 slaughter box trays that each one has 10 pens in it. I would probably say less than 80, and I've restricted myself to just have as my core collection those that are made out of precious metals, meaning sterling silver or
the
gold filled. Yeah, gold filled. Yep. The solid gold models, I have a few of those, as well as the strategic metals, so stainless steel as well as titanium. And then for the brass ones in my collection are those that are lacquered and have the Chinese characters. And so all total probably less than 80 because I don't fill all those trays positions. But there are other pieces that are also interesting too for me. Like I have early samples of the formative stages in which these pewter bicentennial pens were made. So I have one with all of the little trimmings that haven't been removed yet for the cap. So just curiosities like that, as well as different the decorative clip screw, the ends of the cap and the barrel that we call tassies. There are very many different patterns that Parker never put into production, like things that have like a starburst pattern on the end pieces. So those are just pure curiosities that are related to the 75s. but not necessarily made it into production. Just, I just find them interesting to see. And I most recently, I was well, when I say most recently, I have to say that's like 4 years ago. I was very fortunate to have found something that I always wanted to have. I always wanted to have a plastic clear demonstrator 75. So I often had discussions with others about, why didn't they really make this? Today we have materials, plastic materials that are really quite tough. But 4 years ago, I happened to be shown and offered for purchase these pens that when I first saw it, I thought, oh, they look like the colors of the lacquer over brass. But as soon as I picked them up, I noticed that they were extremely light, and they actually had the sterling silver cap, but they basically used metal, but they mated it with a barrel that was made of plastic. And what's interesting is I noticed that the nib that they used all had these metal threads, indicating it was very early on. So it sort of dates the pen as to when they tried this experiment.
Okay.
And then subsequent to that, among them, I thought I saw this all black pen 75. I thought it was just the standard black lacquer over brass also. And when upon closer inspection, I discovered that both the cap and the barrel were plastic, and they were thicker than the normal metal 75s. So these types of prototypes that I was able to find was quite revealing. Indicated that Parker actually did try to experiment with that.
Okay.
So, at any rate, that is also in my collection. There's some wild, crazy things that Parker did. In fact, the Parker France is actually has a reputation of going a little on the dark side and doing things on their own, test marketing it in various towns near the factory, to see if it'll work in terms of sales. So there's all kinds of wild stuff. That's why it's hard for me to enumerate how many different models there are, because there are some that I don't know exist, but they probably do somewhere. They were maybe if I lived near that Parker France factory in Maru, I might have been able to buy one of these things that never actually got sold otherwise, other than the various towns surrounding the Maru factory. So,
yeah. What's your personal favorite? Is there anyone in particular that's your personal favorite in your collection? I mean, obviously they're all your favorite, but I mean, you must have to have a couple, at least one that you really.
Okay. So here. Okay. So the answer to that question actually depends on whether it's something that I use on a regular basis or whether it's a display queen. From a visual striking one, I like the one that they call the Rainbow. It's the real name is the Regency.
Okay.
It's a very striking pattern, and as I said before, it's extremely fragile. But from the ones that are in my rotation is a different thing that I use. In fact, here's one thing that I really like about Parker that I find quite compatible with my effort to be fiscally responsible. And that is the fact that because it is a cartridge converter pen, that means that I can actually go and switch. So right now in my pocket is this one. This is actually not a 75 per se. It's actually the more expensive upscale version of the 75, part of the 75 family tree, known as the Premier, Parker Premier. But the inside, if I were to take the pen apart, the cap and the barrel and the barrel, this business end of the pen is the one that I only use. The point being, I switch cap and barrel to suit what I'm wearing, to suit my mood. So I can, with impunity, I can swap across and still have my favorite pen on the innards.
Well, there you go.
So in rotation, I have about 6 or 8 different models, and
Gotcha.
This Premier model is this pattern is this stripe pattern is quite striking in the sense that it's hard to see, but it's gold plated, but it has alternating lines that are lacquer, black lacquer. So I have that, and then the others I have are 75s.
Well, Tessa's got a quick question. Let me read it to you. She says, she asks, when did the change in the cap happen where the clip moved from the bottom of the chassis and into the clip instead?
I'm not sure I understand. Let me see. Where's that question?
It's at the very bottom. It says, when did the change in the cap happen where the clip moved?
That must be just to you. That just might be to you. I don't see it.
Okay, it might be. It is. Okay, well, that's what she's asking us. Let me see if I can copy and paste that.
Yes, please.
To everybody. There we go. That should work. That way you can see it.
Okay. When the clip moved from the bottom of the chassis.
She says,
I know.
I'm sorry, I mean into the cap.
That's what I thought. That's what I interpreted. Yes. Okay. That's a very, very good question, because what she's talking about, what she's asking about is this. Okay, the way that the cap accommodated the clip itself, where there's that bend to the top.
Yeah.
In the early pens, all right. In the early pens, the ones typically that have the metal threaded gripping section, the notch. She's talking about the notch to accommodate the clip was actually in the chassis, not in the cap. It's the decorative screw. There was a notch there.
Okay.
Right? So just imagine this. Imagine you had to assemble in production these caps, and you wanted to register the clip so that the arrow points down to the Parker name that's at the bottom on the cap band. All right. So as you screw, if the notch is in the cap, in the chassis, as you screw that decorative screw with the notch, the clip would rotate, right?
Yeah.
So the position, depending on the threading, you might be a little off. So I believe that Parker made a production decision to actually make the cap itself, not the chassis, have the notch.
Okay.
That way, the clip was always registered so that the arrowhead pointed down towards its Parker name. All right. So in terms of when that might have happened, I would guess that would be early on.
Okay.
Because now the question also that comes to mind is, could they have, if they have a whole bunch of caps that were already made, how do they throw them away? I mean, that's sterling silver we're talking about.
Right.
So I don't know the precise date when they made that transition. But all I can say is it's probably early on, and that's one of the distinctive feature, not just the metal threads that you find in the gripping section, but also if you look carefully at the chassis, do you see a notch for the clip going into that? So basically the way the clip works is there's a 90-degree bend, and at the top of that bend is a ring for the threads from the clip screw, the chassis to go through that circle. So where did that notch exist?
Okay. All right. Well, we're getting to the point where we've got about 11 minutes left till 5. What we're going to do is I'm going to allow everybody to unmute themselves. And I would ask if anybody's got any questions to ask Lih-Tah, go ahead and unmute yourself and put your video on so that you can talk directly with him. And just kind of be respectful to everybody is all. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I just turned my stuff on. Didn't really have a question, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. You popped up, so I figured I'd pull you in. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question of Lih-Tah, whether it's regards the Parker 75s, or maybe if anybody had any more questions about the Michigan Pen Collectors Club? Go right ahead. I see John. John, did you want to say anything or ask anything? Unmute yourself, John.
How's that?
There you go. There you go.
Okay, just sort of related, but not really directly to your collection, Lih-Tah. Do you remember them making some matching lighters for the Sizzle model and also for the stainless steel? At one point, Parker commissioned a lighter company to make some matching, and in the store I used to sell the matching Sizzle with the matching lighter. I just don't know if you ever remember that.
I do. I can tell you that I'm not familiar with any material other than one made out of sterling silver. It was made in Germany. A lighter. Okay. I'm not familiar with one that was ever made in stainless steel for Parker.
I saw a stainless steel, a brushed stainless steel one as well.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be very interesting for me. I'd love to see one. You have pictures of it, John?
I could look in my files. I sold them both a couple of years ago, but I still might have pictures. I can send them to you.
What's interesting is that the one that actually were sterling silver, it actually says on the very bottom of that lighter, it says 75 lighter, something like that. So actually it was related to the 75 directly because of the inscription.
Okay.
Yeah. Just as far as pen clubs, like I said, if you do a search on the internet, you can find that there are active pen clubs. I see 2 in the Seattle area. There's one in the central coast of California as well, Los Angeles, Denver, DC area. There are 2. There's one in the DC metro area, Atlanta, of course. In fact, I'm on their mailing list, so I get their newsletters. The Southeast Pen Collectors Club, Boston, even upstate New York. So, there are many different pen clubs. And again, if there isn't one, it behooves you to find others that are in your area and start one.
Yeah, Ken Crooker, he just posted the link for the club down there in St. Louis, I believe, is where they're at. Yeah, St. Louis. So there's a link there for anybody that might be in that area.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken.
I just found a lighter, Lih-Tah. I don't know if I can put it up, if you can see it at all.
Yeah, that's the Flaminaire that you're talking about, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So is there any inscription that would relate it to the 75?
No, it just says Zalma, Zalima. It might not have even been through Parker, but it didn't match the stainless steel one.
Okay. Yeah, those 75 sterling silver lighters are quite collectible, and they're quite expensive too. That's on the order of $300 some is the last time I saw one.
Right.
Now,
I know lighters is just about as collectible as pens are too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the thing is that I'm not sure how you would be able to use that lighter. I mean, I had one and I never filled it, so I don't know whether it's butane or what they use as a fuel source.
Yeah, they were butane.
They were butane. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any more questions from anybody else? Lih-Tah.
I guess we're on time. I wanted to say thank you to Dale and to Corinne for arranging this and for hosting this platform, and for everyone that found it to go and attend this session, this seminar. So thank you for your interest. If you have any questions, to reach out to me with regards to the Michigan Pen Club, www.mishpens.com is how you can reach me, or send me an email at my parker75.com website.
Well, that's great, Lih-Tah. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you to everybody. I just was, unless we have any more questions, I think we're just going to go ahead and close everything out. Right now, there's a few things that I'd like to say, and that's just, I want to thank all my colleagues, my friends, everybody that's here, as well as some of the people that have participated through the show for us, with us. I just want to say thank you to everybody. The support's been wonderful. And I wish everybody safe and happy holidays coming up. And I hope that all of you guys in the business, I hope we all stay safe and certainly successful in selling some pens, trying to stay afloat and everything. I have so many things that I'd love to say right now, but I'm not going to get into them. But probably the one thing I feel I have to say is I am so grateful to have Corinne Litchfield, that she has worked so hard with me. So, Corinne, I couldn't have done this without you. So thank you, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And from the Virtual Detroit Pen Show, I hope that everybody has a wonderful time and have a great night.